Hello, welcome back to Sunday School. The last few weeks I've been giving you stories that come from the Bible and some fairy tale stories that have principles that relate to biblical events. I'm going to use another fairy tale story today. I'm sure many or most of you know the story of Cinderella. I think of all the fairy tale stories that exist, Cinderella is my favorite. First, because I love happy ever after stories, and second, because she had such a kindness, even towards those who had been so terrible to her. So I have tried to make this story as short as possible, considering that it is quite long. The story of Cinderella was actually written in the 1600s, and over the years it has been retold and different versions made both from stories and for movies. This particular version that I am going to use today was written by Tasha Gunther. Once upon a time in a land much like yours and mine lived a young girl named Ella. She was born in a small house with her mother Lily and her father, a hard-working merchant. Her mother was kind, loving, and patient, and her father was happy. They were a gracious family, and pretty soon their success enabled them to move into a very large house. Ella loved the lily gardens around the estate and spent much of her time there. In these gardens she met odd yet charming array of friends, 3 blind mice, an uncountable number of birds, and a spider monkey named Zuzu. Months after they arrived, Ella's mother fell sick and she died shortly after, leaving her father heartbroken. After her death, he left on business more regularly and left Ella alone to grow up with the household staff. She grew into a woman of parallel kindness to her mother. During one of his travels, Ella's father met a woman. By the time he arrived home on the day of Ella's 16th birthday, he was married once again. Only this woman was quite different. When Ella saw them get out of the horse-drawn carriage with her 2 daughters, they were dressed in head to toe in silk, lace, gems, and fur. But they were very unpleasant, and they complained about everything. Ella watched as the newcomers spent the next weeks changing everything about the estate. Walls were painted pink, grass was removed and replaced with stone, and the lily gardens were removed and changed for rose ones. As months passed, her father's business began to decline, so he spent more time away. While traveling, Ella was called Cinderella, a name given to her by her terrible stepfamily. She was forced to clean and cook for them and was mistreated. Ella never dared to tell her father about the wickedness of his new wife. One evening when he was home, the father sat by his beloved Ella and whispered to her, "I received a letter today." "A letter from whom?" she whispered back. "The king." "What?" said the stepmother. "The king? What does it say?" Ella's father reached into his coat, pulled out the engraved letter, and handed it to Ella. She read the handwritten words, "On behalf of the king, their graces the Duke and Duchess of Devonshire, you are invited to attend the prince's masquerade ball in 2 weeks." 2 weeks! exclaimed the stepsisters. And for the next 2 weeks all of the women scampered around the house in a frenzy because they couldn't contain their excitement. But Ella took the freedom and opportunity to spend time with her father. They replanted a small lily garden behind the manor. On his last night at home, Ella's father brought her a large box with a white ribbon on it. "For you," he said. She opened it and found a pastel pink dress inside. She could again feel the glare from her stepmother. Ella bid a sad farewell to her father as he left, and she scooped up the 3 blind mice hiding under her new dress and ran upstairs to her room. Sleeping soundly that night, she had wonderful dreams of the prince and the ball. The next morning she awoke to loud shouts and screams. "Cinderella, come down here." She again swept the floors, washed the walls, pruned the garden, and prepared breakfast, lunch, and afternoon tea for the 3 people in her family. "Bring down that gorgeous dress my dear husband brought," the stepmother commanded. "The pink gown?" said Cinderella. "Correct. Bring it down at once." For the rest of the day, Cinderella helped the ladies get ready for the ball. The eldest stepsister wore Cinderella's pink gown. As the women left, Cinderella ran to her room and cried on her bed. And as she did, she saw and heard something. She heard shuffles behind her, and as she looked up, she saw a mask laying in front of her. "Did you make this for me?" Zuzu pushed the mask closer. She picked it up, and she laughed. The mask was made of twigs from the bird's nest. It had lily petals sewn in. 3 had been sewn particularly poorly, but Cinderella knew that the blind mice had done their best. She looked at her friends and cried, "If only I could have gone to the ball and wear your beautiful mask." And then all of a sudden, gold glitter rained down from the ceiling. Whoosh! "Hello, my name is Fairy," her fairy godmother said. "Do you really want to go to that ball? I've got just the right dress for you." And with one flick of her tiny golden wand, Cinderella was dressed in a beautiful blue gown with gorgeous glass slippers. She grabbed her mask and hurriedly followed Fairy out the manor. Fairy whistled loudly and motioned Cinderella to get into the silver carriage. "Now go, 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 or you're going to be late. And don't forget, everything changes back at midnight." Once she arrived at the massive stone palace, she was escorted to the banquet hall, and upon entering, all eyes fell on Cinderella. And she heard comments like, "Oh my, what a wonder! That mask is so strange. Her elegance is breathtaking." Suddenly the prince bowed gently in front of her and asked her to dance, and he danced with her the whole night through. As she danced with him, they discussed many things, and the man was surprised at her knowledge. "You enchant me. My grandfather desires that I spend my evening looking for a wife, but I seem to have found her already," the prince said. But all of a sudden, Cinderella heard the large golden clock in the center of the banquet hall strike midnight. And as it counted down, Cinderella apologized but had to run out of the palace, of course, dropping her one glass slipper. Cinderella had a sleepless night that night, unable to get the image of the prince and his kindness out of her mind. But the next morning she returned to her chores. But as she began to set the table, she heard the wicked ladies complaining. Terrible ordeal that was. Quite horrid. The prince was with that woman all night. "It's because you wore that ugly pink dress," the stepmother said to her daughter. Before they could be seated at the table, a loud knock came to the door. The prince had come to try the glass slipper on all the women of the kingdom to see if it fit, and if it did, that woman would be chosen for his bride. Of course, all of her 2 sisters tried on the slippers, and they did not fit. And as Cinderella started to walk away up the stairs, The prince asked, "Who is that?" Ella replied, "Ella." He repeatedly asked her to come down and greet him, and he outstretched his hand to her. He gently slipped the glass slipper on her foot, and of course it was the perfect match. Without a word he led her away from her stunned, wicked stepfamily and into the royal carriage. She motioned her tiny friends to come along. "You are really enchanting," said the prince. The two were married as soon as they could, and they had a daughter whom Ella named Lily. And once they were king and queen, they ruled the kingdom with kindness for all who lived there. So when I first met Pastor Dave, one of the things that we talked about was forgiveness. And Pastor Dave gave me a 3-part formula, I guess you could say, for forgiveness. The first is own your part of the problem. The second, give up thoughts about getting back at the person, and genuinely wish the best for the person. So if we take the story of Cinderella, there's a lot for which she could be rightfully angry and revengeful when it came to how she had been treated. Her name had been changed to reflect how dirty she was from cleaning and cooking for her miserable stepmother and stepsisters. She was made fun of and criticized for no reason. They made her live in a dark attic. They ruined her garden and all that reminded her of her mom. The eldest stepsister wore the gorgeous pink dress given to her by her father to wear to the ball, leaving her with nothing to wear, and further, being forbidden to even go to the ball. Most of the versions of this story that I have seen or read shows that Cinderella forgave them. In forgiving them, she made them leave the land that was owned by the king. But nonetheless, she gave them a chance to have another life, albeit not as good as the life they had had because of their own actions. Before I go on, I want to show you a picture that I found that was done by a woman named Anne Anderson in the late 1800s to early 1900s. And normally, we do not see Cinderella looking like this. I liked that version. So, what does the Bible tell us about forgiveness? First of all, we need to forgive people a lot, over and over. The Bible speaks of 77 times 7 as an example of how many times we may need to forgive others. The Lord's Prayer says, "Forgive our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us," meaning that we should ask God to forgive us and those that we feel have done wrong to us. That is the hard part. John the Baptizer, by baptizing people, was asking them to repent, to turn around, to do things differently than they had been doing in order to be forgiven. So we need to stop doing some of the things that are mean or harmful to others or even ourselves and ask for forgiveness as a starting point. Esau forgave Jacob for stealing his birthright and all the land and blessings that had come with that. But it took a long time, like maybe 15 years. Even if it takes a long time to forgive somebody, work towards doing it. And Jesus came to earth to teach us how to forgive. And he died on the cross that we might be forgiven through him in the eyes of God. And we need to be grateful and remember that story every day. So I have an assignment for you. What I would like for you to do, can you see that? Is think of someone who has made you mad or treated you unfairly and work to forgive them. Also think of something that you may have done to someone else and work on giving them an apology. Well, that's a lot of food for thought. So give it some thought this week. I hope you enjoyed the story of Cinderella as much as I do. I can't hear it too often. And I also hope that you can reflect on how it symbolizes the principles that we learn in the Bible about forgiveness. Have a good week. Take care. Forgive others.